When I bought my dream home, I thought the worst part would be mowing the lawn. I never imagined the real nightmare would come from the people who claimed to protect the neighborhood. It started with a simple warning letter on my door. Then came the fines, the threats, and the cameras pointed straight at my house. The HOA said they were enforcing the rules, but what they really wanted was control. And when I discovered just how far they'd gone, I knew I had to fight back. Would you have stayed quiet or done what I did?
For years, I thought I had finally found peace. My home sat near the edge of a quiet suburban lake, a calm mirror of blue water surrounded by tall pines and families who waved as they drove by. After years of renting cramped apartments, I finally had space to breathe. Every morning, I'd drink my coffee on the porch, watching sunlight shimmer across the lake, thinking, this is it, I've made it. The community was run by a homeowners association, something I barely noticed at first. Their glossy welcome packet promised neighborhood harmony and community standards. It all sounded professional, harmless even. The board members seemed friendly enough, hosting potlucks and sending cheerful newsletters about upcoming landscaping projects. But underneath that friendly surface, there was something else, something I didn't see right away. It started small, as these things always do. A letter about my dock extension, reminding me to submit approval paperwork. Then another, questioning the color of my deck stain. I brushed it off. I figured it was just the HOA doing its job. But the letters kept coming. One afternoon, I noticed a group of men in bright orange vests unloading materials near the lake. They weren't from the city. When I asked what was going on, one of them smiled and said, "New community cabins, HOA project." Cabins? On my shoreline? I laughed it off, thinking there had to be some mistake. My property line ran right up to the water edge. I even had the original deed framed inside the house, proof of what I owned. But the next day, I heard the sound of heavy machinery. The ground trembled as piles were driven into the earth. The HOA president, a man named Richard, was there, clipboard in hand, sunglasses glinting. When I approached him, he gave me a look that made my stomach tighten. "Just a small development," he said casually. "You'll love it. It's going to raise property values." His tone carried a confidence that didn't fit the situation, like he already knew I wouldn't stop him. Over the next few weeks, construction spread across the shoreline. Cabins rose like weeds after rain. They even ran power lines across part of my property, cutting through my trees without asking. Every time I called the HOA office, they told me to take it up with the board. And every meeting ended with the same smirks, the same dismissive answers. The neighbors whispered, but no one wanted to get involved. After all, the HOA had power. The kind that could fine you, harass you, or even foreclose on your home if you made too much noise. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I started digging through documents, old maps, anything I could find. And the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. The HOA wasn't just pushing boundaries, they were building on my land. And that was the moment everything changed.
The first week, I tried to reason with the HOA. I walked into their office, documents in hand, pointing to the deed, the survey maps, the clearly marked property lines. I expected some acknowledgement, a correction, perhaps a polite apology. But Richard, the president, leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, and smiled like he was playing a game I didn't know the rules to. "Rules are rules," he said smoothly. "And these cabins are within the community plan. You'll just have to get used to it." That was the beginning of the harassment. Letters began arriving almost daily. Fines for unauthorized landscaping, warnings about obstructions near the shoreline, even a notice claiming my dock was inconsistent with community aesthetics. The amounts weren't huge at first. $50 here, $75 there, but the tone was aggressive, threatening. Pay up immediately or face legal consequences. Each letter had the same signature flourish, Richard's name typed in bold, as if to remind me he personally approved my punishment. Then came the inspections. Men I'd never seen before walked onto my property, measuring, photographing, taking notes. They didn't knock. They didn't ask permission. When I confronted one of them, he simply shrugged. "We're just following HOA guidelines." And indeed, every rule was cited, every fine justified with some obscure clause in the community handbook. But when I read those clauses closely, they were vague, contradictory, and sometimes directly in conflict with my deed rights. The cabin project progressed relentlessly. I watched through my binoculars as crews pushed forward, cutting trees that grew along my property line. The noise was constant. Drills, hammers, and the low hum of generators. Even on weekends, the work never stopped. My mornings of coffee by the lake became mornings of stress and frustration. Every time I stepped outside, I felt their eyes on me. Not just the workers, but Richard himself, pacing like a predator, clipboard in hand, as if to make sure I didn't dare interfere. Neighbors started noticing. A few whispered words of sympathy when they saw me at the mailbox, the letters in my hand. "That HOA board is ruthless," one said. "They don't play fair." But most avoided me. No one wanted to risk fines or retaliation. One afternoon, I overheard a neighbor tell someone else, "I'd love to help him, but I don't want to end up in court over it." The fear in that community was palpable, and I began to realize I was fighting this war almost entirely alone. It wasn't just the construction anymore. The harassment began spilling into everyday life. A letter arrived accusing me of excessive noise for playing music in my own backyard, though I rarely played anything louder than a soft hum. Another claimed my dog's barking violated community tranquility standards. One particularly surreal notice demanded I remove the garden gnome in my front yard, which Richard declared not in line with community aesthetics. I stared at the ridiculous letter in disbelief. My childhood memories, my sense of home, my personal space, all being dictated by a group of strangers who claimed to know what was best. I decided to document everything. Cameras, photographs, videos. I collected proof of every encroachment, every violation they falsely claimed, every moment of intimidation. But even with evidence, I knew the fight would be uphill. The HOA board had lawyers, connections, and influence. I was just one homeowner, with a deed and a sense of injustice. Then came the fines, hundreds of dollars at a time, piling up like a storm I couldn't outrun. One letter demanded $1,200 for a property encroachment assessment that was complete nonsense. My mailbox became a place of dread. I would open the flap knowing another threat, another attempt to strip me of control, would be waiting inside. Every time I saw Richard's name on the envelope, my heart would pound. The situation escalated further when I noticed the cabin crews doing something more alarming. Heavy machinery started moving onto a small island on my property, land that no survey or deed could possibly dispute as mine. The island was private, untouched for decades, and now it was becoming part of their expansion. I ran down to the shoreline, waving, yelling, but they ignored me. Richard stood nearby, smiling as if daring me to do more than just yell. I reached my breaking point when I saw one of my old oak trees being marked with orange paint, a tree that had stood there long before the HOA even existed. They intended to cut it down to make way for yet another cabin. I grabbed my phone and called the board office directly. "Sir, this is my property. You have no right to touch that tree," I said, voice trembling with anger. Richard's response chilled me. "We're following the plan. You signed up for community living, didn't you? Trees, docks, cabins, they're all part of the approved development. You'll adjust." That was the moment I realized something terrifying. Richard and the HOA weren't just being petty. They were testing boundaries. They were counting on my compliance, my fear, and the fact that I might eventually give up and accept their encroachment as inevitable. Late that night, I paced my living room, staring at the dark lake. The hum of construction echoed in the distance, punctuated by the occasional crash of a hammer. I thought about what I could do. I considered lawyers, confrontations, protests, everything. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them take my property without a fight. And then, as if confirming my fears, I noticed something strange near the cabins. A small glint near the trees, angled directly toward my living room. A camera. Someone had been watching me. My blood ran cold. The harassment had shifted from letters and fines to surveillance. Every movement I made, every step I took outside was being monitored.
Your Honor, may I ask
Richard
something?
wasn't just testing boundaries anymore. He was violating my privacy. And I knew then, deep in my bones, that this wasn't going to end unless I turned the tables completely.
The night I discovered that hidden camera pointed toward my home, something inside me snapped. I stood in the darkness, staring through my window at the faint red blink of that lens, and realized this wasn't just harassment anymore. It was invasion. The next morning, I climbed the hill behind my house, determined to confirm what I had seen. Sure enough, a motion sensor camera bolted high up on a tree, facing my back porch. I followed the wire line, expecting it to lead to a power source or perhaps another camera. But what I found made my stomach drop. The cable ran straight toward one of the unfinished HOA cabins. I snapped photos, pulled the wire loose, and pocketed the device. It was time to play their game differently. Over the next week, I built my case in silence. I gathered every letter, every photo, every time-stamped image of the construction spreading deeper into my property. I called a land surveyor, not one of the local ones the HOA used, but a state-certified independent professional. When he came out, he spent hours walking the perimeter with GPS equipment. By the end of the day, his expression told me everything. "Sir," he said quietly, "they're at least 30 yards into your property line. Those cabins, every one of them is built on your land." I thanked him, trying to mask the trembling in my hands. 30 yards, 23 cabins. My private island, now overtaken by a so-called community project. While the HOA paraded around like they owned the place, I stayed silent. I let them finish. I watched as they cut ribbons, took photos, and congratulated themselves on their successful lakeside expansion. The entire neighborhood was invited to the grand opening. Food trucks lined the street, kids played near the docks, and Richard, in his ridiculous white polo shirt and sunglasses, gave a speech about building community through shared vision. He even mentioned the new cabins as a landmark addition to our growing HOA family. I stood at the edge of the crowd, camera in hand, documenting everything. The applause, the smiles, the laughter echoing across the water. It was surreal. My land, my trees, my view, all turned into a playground for people who had no idea they were standing on stolen ground. And I let them enjoy it for a little while. 3 weeks later, I filed my lawsuit. When the summons reached the HOA office, chaos erupted. My attorney, a calm, unshakable woman with decades of experience in property law, walked me through every detail. The deed, the survey, the aerial maps, the recorded footage of construction equipment trespassing onto my land, all airtight. I had proof that not only had the HOA trespassed, but they'd spent community funds to develop private property. Richard called me the next morning. His tone had changed completely. Gone was the smug arrogance. He said, "There's no need to escalate this. We can work something out privately." I simply replied, "See you in court," and hung up. The day of the hearing, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Half the neighborhood had shown up, curious to see what would unfold. The HOA board sat together at the front, their lawyer shuffling papers and whispering urgently to Richard. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. When our turn came, my attorney stood and began calmly outlining the evidence. She showed the survey results, the recorded footage of construction equipment trespassing onto my land, and even the camera we'd found hidden in the trees. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Then she handed me the floor. I pulled out a single document, the original property deed, signed and notarized decades ago, with clear coordinates marking the island as private. "This," I said, voice steady, "is the deed. And according to it, everything you built, every cabin, every fence, every line you've drawn, sits squarely on my private property." The judge examined the paperwork carefully, comparing it with the survey results. After several tense minutes, he looked up. "This is clear. The HOA had no legal right to build on this land. Mr. Richard, your board is in violation of multiple state property laws." Richard's face turned pale. His lawyer tried to interject, mumbling something about community improvement, but the judge cut him off sharply. "Improvement doesn't excuse trespass. You owe this homeowner restitution and the immediate removal of all unauthorized structures." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. I could hear people whispering, "He won. He actually won." Richard slumped back into his chair, defeated, all his power, all his arrogance, gone in an instant. But that wasn't the end. The judge's ruling required not just removal of the cabins, but also repayment of the HOA funds spent on construction, nearly $500,000. The board members turned on each other instantly, arguing, blaming, desperate to avoid the fallout. For me, that moment wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. I stood there, silent, watching as the people who had tried to crush me faced the consequences of their greed. And when I stepped out of that courtroom, the sunlight felt different, brighter, freer. It took months for the cabins to come down. Piece by piece, the structures vanished, the same way my peace had been taken from me, now being restored plank by plank. The construction crews returned, this time under court supervision, to dismantle everything they had built. Neighbors watched in silence. Some waved from their porches as I passed, their eyes full of apology and relief. For the first time in years, the lakefront felt quiet again. The birds returned. The hum of machinery was replaced by the soft lap of water against the shore. Richard resigned as HOA president shortly after the verdict. Rumors spread that he'd been removed entirely, facing personal liability for some of the costs. The board restructured, promising transparency and accountability. But the truth was clear. The HOA's power had been broken. One afternoon, as I stood by the water, watching the last cabin being hauled away, a neighbor approached me. She hesitated before speaking. "You really did it," she said softly. "You stood up to them." I smiled, a tired but genuine smile. I didn't have a choice. She nodded. "We all should have done something sooner." Those words stayed with me. In the months that followed, the community changed. People began attending HOA meetings again, not out of fear, but out of interest. They demanded answers, questioned policies, and refused to sign blank checks for projects no one had approved. The spirit of the neighborhood began to shift from control to cooperation. As for me, I kept living by the lake, quietly, peacefully. My dock was repaired, my trees regrew, and the reflection on the water once again belonged only to me. Sometimes I'd still find remnants of the cabins, a nail in the soil, a piece of splintered wood. I'd toss them into a pile, a reminder of what once was and what never would be again. But the impact went beyond my property. My case made headlines in local news. Homeowner wins against HOA in landmark property dispute. Dozens of other homeowners reached out, sharing stories of unfair treatment, intimidation, and harassment. Some even said my case gave them the courage to fight back. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet, steady. A single piece of paper held high in court, a deed that no one thought would matter. And sometimes it's the sound of silence after years of noise, the kind that reminds you that peace, once fought for, means more than anything money can buy. So the next time someone says the HOA knows best, remember this: they only know as much as you let them. Stand your ground, protect what's yours, because sometimes doing nothing is exactly what they're counting on. And when they think they've won, let them finish. Then, pull out the deed.
If you enjoyed seeing Justice Served, make sure you hit subscribe, because the next HOA nightmare might just be wilder than this one. Don't miss it.